The driveway looked foreign now, bare, sun-bleached, and silent. Where the BMW once gleamed under the Georgia sun, there was only a faint oil stain on the concrete, like a scar left behind by something that didn't belong to me anyway. I stood there longer than I should have, arms crossed, bare feet numbing on the stone tiles, staring at the nothingness like it owed me an explanation. "You were born with two left brains," Dad once said, his version of clever. It was his parting shot the day they signed the house away. It still rang in my ears like the final note of a bad song you can't forget. The house had always felt more like a set piece than a home. Marble floors that clicked too loud when you walked. Chandeliers no one ever looked at. I just maintained it, dusted it, kept it from falling apart, never quite lived in it. After the final papers were signed, everyone treated brunch like a celebration. Brunch. Like we hadn't just buried our family legacy. They laughed over mimosas while I sat with toast I couldn't chew. Everyone acted like it was a bump in the road. But I was the road they ran over. They called me a fool, I whispered under my breath, reaching for the last sip of my lukewarm coffee. But I was the only one who read the contract. The air inside the dining room was thick, almost stage. Mom tapped her fork against her glass, all faux concern. "Well," she said, eyes darting to avoid mine, "not everyone's meant for real estate." My brother Ford didn't miss his cue. "Let's be honest, Clove's more like the paper-pushing babysitter of this family," he said with a smirk that made my stomach knot. "She reads contracts for a living. Can't even sell her own house." I didn't reply. What would be the point? Dad sat at the head, thumbing through old financial statements like they were recipes. When I mentioned how deep the debt went, how the mortgage's balloon clause was a ticking bomb, he scoffed. "Law books don't fix broken wallets, sweetheart." I nodded then, just like I always did. Bit my lip, swallowed whatever pride I had left, and tucked my voice behind my teeth. Why explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you? But I hadn't been silent the whole time. Months earlier, I brought them a neatly highlighted packet. I remember the weight of it, how my fingers trembled handing it over during one of our family meetings. I laid it on the dining table like evidence in a courtroom. Ford barely skimmed the cover page. "Dad's got this," he waved it off. "He's done real estate longer than you've been alive." "And Dad?" He just stared at me like I'd insulted his legacy. "This house is our legacy," he said. "Don't act like a paralegal with a god complex." I remember every word, every shrug, every time they talked over me like I was the static between radio stations. They mocked me, because I was the only one who read the fine print. That night, after the sale was final, I stood in my room folding laundry that no longer had a home. Each shirt, each towel, felt heavier in my hands. The room was quiet but not peaceful. Just emptied. My phone buzzed, a reminder from my debt tracking app. The house sale hadn't even cleared the outstanding balances. They sold the car. They sold the house. But they kept their pride like it was some priceless heirloom. I caught my reflection in the mirror and whispered, "You weren't crazy. Just quiet." Then I looked at my laptop screen, an unsent email, drafted and redrafted, the subject line still. "To whom it may concern. I told you so." I deleted it. Next morning, I walked to the library, my retreat since I was a girl. The only place where silence felt like power instead of punishment. Mr. Hansley, now retired, was shelving books in the law section when I found him. His beard had gone white, but his eyes were just as sharp. He looked up and smiled. "You always did see what others ignored," he said. His words cracked something open inside me. I hadn't been wrong, just outnumbered. He tapped the edge of a shelf. "Remember what your mother used to say? Sometimes, the smartest one must bite her tongue. Until it bleeds." I carried that line with me out the door like a stone in my pocket. A reminder. A reckoning. The sky was low, summer heat pressing against my skin as I stepped outside. I almost didn't notice the envelope until it slid out of my borrowed book, a county court seal staring back at me. It wasn't for me. It was a subpoena. For my father. For the first time in months, my lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something near it. Funny. They mocked me for ruining the family's assets. Now the court wanted me there, as a witness. I wasn't the one on trial, but when the judge looked up, he called my name first. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter unfolded before me, though I'd already read it 4 times. It didn't surprise me, not really. If anything, it felt overdue, like a clock finally striking an hour that should have chimed years ago. It wasn't a casual notice. It called me, Clove Marlowe, key witness. Not defendant, not plaintiff, key witness. A third-party lender was suing the family trust, and my father, Richard Marlowe, was listed as a central figure in what they called intentional misrepresentation. Legal language I knew like muscle memory. My hands weren't shaking from fear. They were finally trembling from clarity. The kind that comes when someone finally stops gaslighting you and the world begins to match what you've always known. I stared at the paragraph about the false asset statements and thought, he read the same numbers I did. He just thought the world would believe him louder. I folded the paper carefully, aligning the edges. The old me would have hesitated, tried to make sense of it. But now? Now I just whispered, they thought I was the assistant. Turns out, I was the expert witness. The apartment was quiet, rented, modest, but it was clean and more mine than the mansion ever was. The morning light slanted across the floor in narrow bands, the kind that remind you how long you've been sitting still. 6 months. That's how far back I rewound in my mind. 6 months ago, Dad signed those papers with the same gold pen he used on birthday cards. Flashy, hollow. I had been right there, across the table, sliding a packet of documents forward, highlighting what he didn't want to see. But the real twist? I'd sent him a certified email too, timestamped, logged, archived. Subject line: mortgage terms, critical review. His reply? Just 6 words. Noted. Stay in your lane. It wasn't that he didn't know. He didn't care. That realization sat heavy in my chest, like a stone too big to swallow. I looked around the room, empty of furniture I couldn't afford to move, but filled with something new, truth. My truth. My love for my family hadn't blinded me. It had muffled me. They hadn't misunderstood. They had chosen dismissal. I said it aloud for the first time, each word pulled from deep inside my ribs. They used me. The knock on the door came around noon. I didn't check the peephole. I didn't need to. I already knew the rhythm. Ford. He looked undone, unshaven, fidgeting, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. Hey, kiddo, he said, like we were still playing that tired family script. I leaned on the doorframe but didn't step aside. What do you want, Ford? He tried to act casual. Mom and Dad, they're just asking if you can, clarify a few things for the court. Just clean it up. Make it clear we didn't mean. Lie? I finished for him. He shifted. Come on. No one's accusing you. You're not on trial. I let him talk. I let him fumble through phrases like, it's just optics, and, we're still family. He called me, kiddo, again. Twice. Maybe 3 times. Each one felt like sandpaper against my skin. I sipped my tea slowly. I didn't rush him, but when I spoke, I slid a single printed sheet across the counter. The mortgage terms. The same ones he laughed at. The same ones he told me I was paranoid about. His jaw tensed. This wasn't on me. Dad was confident. You were careless, I said flatly. And I was convenient. He opened his mouth, closed it, took a step back. Don't ruin everything just to be right. I stood. That's what you never understood. I never wanted to be right. I just didn't want to be erased. He didn't slam the door behind him. But I locked it slowly after he left. That small, gentle click? It sounded like power. Finally. I stood by the window, teacup still warm in my hands, watching him get into the car we used to share rides in. He backed out too fast, tires kicking up gravel that hadn't settled yet. That evening, while putting away laundry, I saw the box. Unlabeled, taped shut, pushed into the far corner of the closet like a memory no one wanted to open. I pulled it out and sliced it open. Mom's files. Inside were old report cards, a photo from my paralegal graduation, and a birthday card from when I turned 23. Inside, her handwriting curved across the card like she hadn't thought too hard about it. Someday, you'll be the one holding the pen that writes the final word. I sat on the floor, box at my knees, card in my hands, and felt a single tear slide down my cheek. Not from grief. From mourning the version of her that might have believed in me. I folded the card and slid it into my wallet, replacing an expired credit card. A reset. Quiet but deliberate. The next morning, I walked to the courthouse. Early. I wore my navy suit, the one they said made me look too serious. The one they never took seriously. The steps felt higher than usual. Or maybe I was just walking differently. Ahead, I spotted my father's lawyer pacing, looking over his shoulder like someone owed him an explanation. He looked unsettled. Good. They taught me silence was grace, I thought. But in court, silence is surrender. A court clerk stepped out from behind the security line and gestured to me. Ms. Marlowe, right this way. I followed her into a private conference room. The judge wasn't ready yet. But my father was already sweating. The courthouse hallway felt narrower than it should, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, pressing me toward a truth I had long avoided. I lingered just outside the judge's chamber, hands folded, posture careful. My father sat a few feet away with his lawyer, stiff-backed, eyes cast forward, deliberately ignoring me. The weight of silence had a sound, sharp, deliberate, meant to wound. I drew in a slow breath, then another, not out of nerves but to steady the muscles in my jaw, to remind myself that I controlled nothing yet held everything. A flash of memory came unbidden. A summer barbecue years ago, backyard laughter, the smell of grilled corn and sunblock. I wasn't invited. I watched from a distance as they mingled, voices warm and familiar, yet intentionally excluding me. It was the first echo of a pattern I would spend decades deciphering. Silence had always been the instrument of their control, and I had spent years learning to play along, biting back the truth until it rotted quietly inside me. The next memory struck like cold glass. Law school orientation. I returned home, luggage in tow, and found my bedroom repainted, transformed into a reading lounge, without warning. My belongings stacked neatly in the basement, a cot waiting, a space designed for someone else's comfort. I had slept there, beneath the hum of pipes, under a fluorescent light that made everything feel temporary. No one checked. No one apologized. Love, I realized, in that house, was conditional. It required compliance. It demanded invisibility. Back in the present, the clerk called my name. I straightened the collar of my navy suit and walked in first, deliberately adjusting the microphone. Authority was silent, yet unmistakable. My father's lawyer's objection was predictable, and the judge's overrule was satisfying. Today, I was not merely participating, I was a critical witness in a state investigation. I recounted details I had observed over the years, subtle financial missteps, overlooked obligations, the way small errors became large ones because they refused counsel. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth, steady and precise, letting it unfold in measured words that could not be denied. Outside, during recess, my mother approached, hesitant. Her posture seemed fragile, her eyes darting toward the floor as if she feared what the confrontation might reveal. "You've made your point," she said softly. I didn't flinch. "No," I replied evenly, "the point made itself. I just stopped erasing it." We spoke like strangers sharing a sidewalk, brief, precise, neither yielding. I remembered a phrase I had read long ago: when someone's absence becomes your comfort zone, you stop craving their presence. She walked away without turning back, and I felt neither relief nor triumph, only a quiet, undeniable clarity. Returning home, I spotted the box of old files still lying on the floor from my last search. Curiosity, tinged with a muted sense of grief, drew me to it. Beneath the top layers, I found a birthday card that had never been given. My name scrawled across the front, inside a check for $100 with a scribbled note: "Too busy, love you anyway, Mom." My first instinct was to feel the sting of neglect, but I didn't cry. I tore the check in half, the paper splitting with a crisp, symbolic snap. "Too little, too late, and not for sale," I muttered, the sound barely audible but satisfying. It was a declaration. I would not be a passive participant in their games anymore. I would act, carefully, deliberately, and without compromise. Night had fallen when an envelope appeared in my mailbox, anonymous, plain. Inside, printed screenshots of a forged financial document bore my signature, manipulated, fabricated. I held the papers in silence, pulse steady, mind racing but disciplined. This was no accident, it was provocation. They wanted to see if I would flinch, if I would hesitate, if I would be broken. I had spent years learning that my strength came from calm observation, from timing, from understanding the pattern of their manipulations. I sat at my desk, the glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. I traced the forged signature with a fingertip, imagining the ripple it would create in the courtroom. And then I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, they just lit a fire they can't put out. I chose the diner for its neutral hum of conversation and clatter of silverware, a place where no past grievances could dictate the rhythm. Carson arrived a few minutes late, fidgeting with his coffee cup, eyes darting around the room before settling on me. He hadn't expected me to reach out, not in years. The laughter and smiles around us contrasted sharply with the tension at our table, a silent reminder that life went on for everyone else while ours was tangled in lies and omissions. I placed the envelope between us and fixed him with a steady gaze. Carson, I began calmly, we need to talk about this. He shifted, tense, yet tried to mask it with a half-smile. I watched the subtle signs, the twitch of a finger, the avoidance of eye contact. He knew more than he let on. I didn't raise my voice. This path will collapse under you before it does under me, I said, each word deliberate. His hands froze over the mug, and for a moment, the diner seemed to shrink around us, holding its breath. The memory hit me then, sharp and unyielding. Years ago, a family dinner where I had tried to call out my father's questionable tax filings. Shut up and be grateful, my father had said, his tone final, a lock snapping shut on my voice. Carson had laughed at me then, dismissive, complicit. I left the table silently, a teenager learning that being right didn't guarantee being heard. That night echoed in my chest now, reinforcing the gravity of what I faced. Being ignored had shaped me, but it hadn't broken me. Back in my apartment, dusk bleeding through the blinds, I began the methodical work of assembling the evidence I'd collected over the years. Emails, contracts, voice memos, everything was laid out on my kitchen counter. A whiteboard stood against the wall, lines connecting dates, names, transactions. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. My internal voice guided me, this isn't revenge. This is cleanup. And it's long overdue. Each connection I made tightened the web of accountability, and I felt a rare calm. Planning replaced reaction, strategy replaced fury. By evening, a formal letter had been dispatched via my attorney, addressed to my father and Carson. It detailed the forgery, outlined perjury risks, and spelled out next steps. Hours passed in quiet anticipation before my phone buzzed with a single line, "We need to talk." It was Carson. My pulse remained steady, a faint smirk playing at the corners of my mouth. Now they want to listen, I whispered to myself, tasting the rare satisfaction of being taken seriously. Later, I recorded a voice note, a habit from my college days, speaking softly into the recorder. If they think silence is your weakness, let them hear how steady your breath is while the storm hits, I murmured. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't a declaration or a show of strength. It was anchoring, a way to remind myself that control could exist even amid chaos. After listening, I deleted it. Closure needed no archiving. The following morning, I opened my inbox with the same habitual caution I applied to every message. One subject line made my chest tighten. You missed something. Look closer. Attached was a blurry security camera image, grainy yet unmistakable. My father entering a building I had been told he never visited. I studied it for a long moment, pulse calm, mind alert. I had warned them. Now I warn no more. The next moves were mine, and the game had shifted entirely into my hands. The morning light filtered softly through my blinds, painting stripes across the kitchen table where I sat with a notebook before me, coffee long forgotten. The anonymous email from yesterday was open again, its blurred photo stretching across the screen. My eyes caught a faint date stamp, barely legible, overlapping with a family gathering I had been told my father never left. The memory of that speech, his words empty, his pride intact, suddenly made sense. I whispered to the quiet apartment, so that's why the speech felt hollow. No anger yet, only a measured determination. Today wasn't about reaction, it was about mission. By mid-morning, I found myself in the public library archives, a place I'd always considered my sanctuary. Dusty ledgers, real estate filings, nonprofit records, they became a map of truths my family tried to bury. Hours passed as I cross-referenced names and dates, each document peeling back another layer of their deception. My breath caught when I discovered a shell company registered under my father's name months before the mansion was refinanced. And there it was, my own digital signature, forged, tied to a secondary loan application. The realization settled in, heavy and bitter. They had been orchestrating this behind my back, using me as a buffer. I printed copies and lined them up on the table, timestamps matching my old emails. They didn't just erase me. They redrew me in ink I didn't authorize, I murmured, hands trembling slightly, not from fear but recognition of the betrayal. Walking home, the folder of evidence weighed like a boulder in my arms. The neighborhood seemed ordinary, but each step felt charged with the gravity of what I carried. A child's chalk outline on the sidewalk caught my eye, a fleeting, innocent gesture. Yet it struck me. They drew the body before the crime. A bitter smile ghosted my lips. I considered confronting my mother, seeking some acknowledgement, some glimmer of complicity or regret, but I knew it would be dismissed, rationalized away. Better to act where action mattered. At home, I submitted a formal fraud report online, silent, deliberate. The act felt anticlimactic in its simplicity, yet monumental in its significance. Sometimes justice isn't a gavel. It's a mouse click. Later, I drafted a text to my mother. You knew. You had to, right? My thumb hovered over the send button. I deleted it, drafted again, legal terminology inserted, then deleted once more. I realized the message wasn't for answers, it was a test of my own tolerance for silence. Frustration rippled through me but was tempered by clarity. I turned the phone face down and picked up my recorder, speaking aloud into the quiet apartment. I kept thinking maybe they were scared too. But scared people don't forge names, liars do. The words hung in the air, grounding me. Dinner was a solitary affair. Candlelight flickered on the counter as I plated my meal with a care I hadn't afforded myself in years. A memory surfaced. After graduation, my parents had promised to take me out. Traffic was the excuse. I had been left with cereal and solitude. Tonight, I ate for myself, asserting control over the smallest, yet profound, of choices. This time, I won't be stood up. Not by them. Not by my hope, I whispered, fork in hand, candlelight warming the small victory of my autonomy. Night deepened and the apartment grew quiet. The phone buzzed, a number unknown. I didn't answer. Voicemail played back, voice altered, menacing in its calm. You need to stop digging. You're making enemies you won't see coming. I listened twice, letting the words sink. Threats were no longer subtle. The pretense had ended. I set the phone aside, pulse steady. They've stopped pretending. Good. So have I. The calm before the storm had passed, and I was ready for the collapse to begin, armed with clarity, evidence, and a resolve that no shadow of family deception could erode. Morning arrived with a quiet unease that settled into my chest like a stone. The voicemail from last night played again, robotic in cadence, yet something about its rhythm nudged a memory I couldn't quite place. My coffee had gone cold beside the laptop, untouched, while I sat, fingers poised over the keyboard but unwilling to move. Threats didn't scare me. Patterns did. I forwarded the message to Ford, the friend and cybersecurity consultant I trusted most, and told myself I would go to work like any other day, because vanishing would be the exact response they wanted. The law office was unusually silent when I arrived, colleagues casting glances I deflected with practiced professionalism. Mrs. Heller, my boss, pulled me aside, mentioning someone had called, posing as HR to verify my employment details. My pulse didn't spike, instead, I felt a cold clarity settling in. I reviewed my HR file and noticed discrepancies in my employment history that had not been there before. Someone was attempting to tarnish my professional credibility now, not merely my finances. I made notes in my small, proof of pattern, notebook, recording every detail for reference, dates, anomalies, and the quiet unfolding of what I now saw as a deliberate plan. Lunch broke the tension with an unexpected confrontation. Across the street, I spotted Carson pretending to text, waiting for me. Against caution, I crossed over. His accusation cut sharp. I had turned the family into a legal circus, and he claimed our father's health was deteriorating because of me. I caught the subtle tremor in his hand and paused. Was it guilt, fear, or something else? My voice held a controlled edge as I replied, "You forged my name. I'm not the one killing him." The small crowd of passers-by whispered and watched, tension thick in the air. Carson stormed off, muttering, "You'll regret this," leaving me standing still, heart steady, observing how easily fear tried to masquerade as authority. Memories surged unbidden as I returned to the office, a flashback to teenage Clove overhearing my father instruct my mother, "If she ever questions me, make her think she's crazy."